Tales of Mithrym.
Scales of Justice, read by Ennatos. Part 10. Voices. We have to go. Dervil put a hand on Elvin's shoulder as they watched the last of the wardens march away. The couple stayed behind and were beginning to walk the perimeter of the square. It was only a matter of time before they would be found. Okay, come on. Elvin stood up slowly, and they began walking further down the alley. At the other end, they quickly ducked down again as they spotted another warden standing on duty on a nearby balcony. They're everywhere, Dervil whispered. How are we going to get out? We'd need eyes at the back of our head to spot them all. Elvin reached into his pocket. His hand met the cold metal of his ring. He drew it out and looked at it. I think that may be our only option, he said thoughtfully. Dervil winced. Then she sighed and drew out her own ring too. I'm not happy about this. I hope you know that, she said as she slipped it on. Elvin did likewise. Me neither, I promise you. She heard his voice in her head. Now come on, you go high, I will go low. It was slow progress at first. Every time they found an empty alley or passage, another warden seemed to come on duty. They began to feel as though the whole city were after them. Slowly, though, they were able to move along. They took it in turns to watch the other as they each timed their movements perfectly, to dart behind the backs or over the heads of their would-be captors. The sun was high in the sky as they made their way further along to their lodgings, hoping beyond hope that the wardens would not be there yet, and that they might be able to collect some of their things. They did their best not to speak as they went, but as time went by, their fear grew with it. Where do you think Ducky is? Elvin began to wonder, and Dervil heard it. I don't know. They said the station, but... She stopped as she ducked down to avoid another pair of watchful eyes. I do not believe that for a second, Elvin scoffed internally. My opinion of their tactics is somewhat lessened of late. He stopped as well as he slid behind a doorway and waited, eyes closed, watching through Dervil's visions until he had been passed. I know, Dervil sighed. We have to get out of here, get out of the city, but we need Ducky.
I see you.
They both fell to the floor as the voice boomed inside their heads. Dervil dared to look first. She raised her head and began to scout around for any signs of movement. The rooftop seemed clear, though, with barely any sound from the street below. Elvin then opened his eyes too and started to look about him. They could both still hear it, though, a cold and painful laugh inside their heads. Together, they began to look up. They gasped. High above them, they could make out the figure of a warden, riding atop a dragon, circling around. It began to descend in sharper and sharper turns towards them. All the time, the voice continued.
I see you.
Dervil leapt to her feet. There was little reason to hide now. They had been seen. She bolted across the open roof and jumped to the next building. High above, she could now hear the flapping of the wings as the creature and its rider came closer and closer. Up in front, she could make out another edge, this time with a long jump to the next. She looked about quickly, and then spotted a ladder fixed to the rooftop, leading down to a yard below. As she approached the edge, she skirted the parapet and rounded on the ladder. With a flourish, she jumped and landed feet and hands on the rungs and began to climb down as fast as she could. The yard was empty. The remains of a small outbuilding were leaning against one wall, and the paving underfoot was worn and uneven. Back on the rooftop, the rider pulled hard at the reins of the dragon, and it veered around, landing hard on the ground in front of Durville. She was trapped. On the beast's back, the warden drew a small crossbow and loaded a quarrel onto it. Extending a hand out, the steel tip was pointed directly at Durville. Durville closed her eyes. As she did, she realized that she could now see the warden's back. Elvin leapt from a balcony and landed hard on the warden, knocking both of them off the dragon and hard onto the paving below. They struggled for a moment. The glint of the quarrel passed by Elvin's face, but he brought a hand round and caught the crossbow hard, hurling it towards a wall where it cracked and fell to the ground with a twang and splintering of wood. With his other hand, he brought round a fist and punched the warden squarely in the face. The figure slumped down into unconsciousness. Durville ran over, and the two hugged one another as anger turned to anxiety as they took in their predicament. "What do we do now?" Elvin asked. "They are bound to have seen us come this way. There are probably a score or more of them running here as we speak." "I know. I don't think we can trust the sneaking anymore." Durville looked Elvin up and down, and then looked at the resting shape of the warden. There was no way that they could walk out of this as they were, and they were no match in combat with the whole force of the Alexia City Watch. Their options seemed to be few at best. "I think we're going to have to be clever about this," Durville said at last. "How are you for play acting?" "Me?" Elvin looked shocked. "What has that got to do with anything?" "I mean, I think we can get into the station, maybe even into the prison. We could try and find Ducky. But it would take a bit of deceit," she half smiled, "if you think you're up to the task." Elvin looked down at the warden. "Do you mean?" He was beginning to understand. "They wouldn't suspect it. And you're about the same build. You could say you found me and arrested me." "It's a risky plan for sure," Elvin said. "But I do not think we have much choice. It could work, though." He began to reach down and pull at the warden's clothes. They both jumped to their feet, though, as a voice behind them spoke.
You are assuming that I will let you leave.
Tales of Mithrym are written by Jimmy Clephane. Mithrym is a fantasy world built for the Dungeon Room role-playing game system. To find out more about the world of Mithrym, or to try out the game, go to www.mithrym.com.